All right. So hello and welcome to this first session of the Chinese Business History webinar here at the Hong Kong Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Hong Kong. I'm Ghassan Moazin, and I'm one of the co-conveners of the Chinese Business History cluster at the Hong Kong Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences. So for this first session, we're very glad and honored to welcome to the Chinese Business History webinar Professor Selda Altan. Professor Altan is Associate Professor of History at Randolph College. She specializes in labor history, colonialism, and comparative empires. Her research examines the experiences of Chinese workers in transnational and imperial contexts, with a particular focus on labor markets, migration, and capitalist development. And today she's going to talk to us about her recent new book called Chinese Workers of the World, Colonialism, Chinese Labor, and the Yunnan Indochina Railway, which came out with Stanford University Press last year. Before I hand things over to Professor Altan, I should say the format is as usual, so we'll have around 30 minutes of presentation followed by a Q&A. If you have any questions, then please post them at any time through the Q&A button in Zoom, and then I will read them out during the Q&A session. All right, but I don't want to take up any more time. So, Selda, if you're ready, please feel free to get started.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen first here so that I can start the presentation. Okay. 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 Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's really a pleasure and honor to be here today with you. And I have to confess, I'm a little surprised to see so many attendees here. To me, it's still very early in the morning, but maybe your habits are different. And it shows that this program has been doing really well and established a good audience. Congratulations on that. And I also would like to thank Ghassan Moazin for his kind invitation. I will share my research with you, and I look forward to your comments and questions. Today's talk will focus on my book, Chinese Workers of the World, published last year by Stanford University Press. And like many first monographs, it grew out of my PhD dissertation and is primarily based on archival research in China, France, and the United Kingdom. Here, I think I should make a note about my archival experience in China. As a China historian, I wanted to write this book based on archival research in China, but at the time I was doing the research around 2013 and 14, the research in China was not so easy, and I had great difficulty accessing sources, especially in Yunnan provincial archives. So I was in Yunnan, I used the library, I used published archival sources, but the bulk of the material in the book is coming from French colonial and diplomatic archives in France. Of course, this created some problems in the nature of the text because I was trying to write the history of Chinese workers. And as you know, we have that big question, can the subaltern speak? It was really hard to get the voice of the Chinese workers themselves, as they did not leave anything behind, anything written. But still, because I believe that giving some voice to the subaltern is so important, I wanted to read all these official documents, sometimes, colonial documents, to find the voice of these Chinese workers. So that was a major difficulty. But I also incorporated articles from the Yunnan Journal, again, a magazine published by the Revolutionary Alliance from 1906 to 1911. I will talk about this very briefly towards the end. And these articles, it was a nationalist revolutionary magazine published by Yunnanese intellectuals led by, of course, Sun Yat-sen. And these articles allowed me to compare the perspective of Qing officials with those of Chinese nationalists and analyze the debates over foreign intrusion, labor exploitation, and revolutionary activity in Yunnan. So again, there is not enough coming directly from the mouth of these workers that I try to give the story of, but at least I use those multiple sources comparatively to get something, to get closer to their experiences. So since I've already given several book talks in different contexts, my aim today is a little different. I do not want to talk about the book in general terms. I will not summarize the entire book or entire chapters, but I plan to focus on the book's central argument and highlight its significance for the field of business history. Of course, it might not be something closer to what you actually do, but I will try my best. So to give some background, the book examines the history of the railway constructed by France between China's southwestern province of Yunnan and modern-day Vietnam, then a French colony known as Indochina. So before the 19th century, Yunnan was not a very popular destination for foreigners compared to China's coastal cities, of course, due to its rudimentary transportation infrastructure or relative isolation. This began to change in the 19th century when foreigners gained the right to travel deeper into China beyond the treaty ports, specifically missionaries, but we also had many travelers, adventurous figures and business figures trying to discover those new isolated territories. So Yunnan soon became a region of rivalry between British and French colonizers because by this time Britain had already consolidated its dominance in India, Burma, Tibet, and France was trying to develop its relatively new colony in Vietnam and in Southeast Asia. But Yunnan was not contested by Britain and France alone. In the broader context of the so-called scramble for China, other imperial powers, Germany, Russia, Japan, and others were also pressing their claims. They carved out spheres of influence through railways, mines, treaty ports, and concessions. This atmosphere of competition definitely shaped French ambitions in Yunnan. Indeed, around this time, French business investment in China was not comparable to that of other powers. I gathered some statistics from the recent publication, Cambridge Economic History of China. This was published almost 3 years ago, and they use customs office, statistics. And indeed, those statistics were also published at the time, and I was able to get those numbers also in some English language or French language publications. So they are quite recent and analyzed quite well by these scholars. So if you look at these stats, you see how indeed France did not have a significant share. Of course, it was a major power, many, with established commercial interest in China. This does not change this fact, but you can see a comparative picture here of, for example, average trade shares until 1900. And again, when you compare these numbers, you see the absolute dominance of Great Britain. Japan is definitely a rising figure, and we see other European powers, even the United States. On this next slide, you can also see business investments in China. Again, if you look at these numbers, you see France's share by 1902 is around 6%, and it's very little compared to Britain and Russia. So Britain and Russia were more involved in direct business investment. So not only in financial avenues, but also in other fields. They were very active doing all sorts of commercial activities with their established business people. By 1902, you see even Germany has a bigger share than France. This stat is also showing the share of colonial powers. This indeed is covering the period called Treaty Port era. So it covers maybe a longer time period, but still foreign firms in China French foreign firms in China by this time were again very limited. And of course, there are multiple reasons for this. It's about, foreign policy decisions in France, but France overall, in summary, did not have as interest comparable to other powers like Great Britain, Japan, or Russia. Even at some point, United States surpassed France here as even a new colonial powers. In the absence of a strong business presence of France in China, French investors and travelers promoted what became known as the Yunnan myth. So France had some interest in silk business, obviously, but now a group of adventurous business people and travelers, they came to visit Yunnan, and they started to create accounts creating this myth known as Yunnan myth. The idea that this remote mountainous province was both rich in natural resources and strategically positioned as a gateway between China and French Indochina. Here, obviously, the location of Yunnan was key for French interest. The Lyon mission of 1894, an exploratory expedition backed by French commercial interests, played a key role in popularizing this vision and convincing metropolitan business circles and politicians that Yunnan could be opened up to global markets if only modern transportation could be established. So it was these, group of explorers who were trying to convince the metropolitan center for the need to colonize or to expand into Yunnan so that France could do better in their own colony in Vietnam. These ambitions, however, were not uncontested within France itself. Debates raged in Paris about the value of colonial expansion. Some politicians and intellectuals favored aggressive expansion overseas, more, close to British free trade perspectives. They argued that colonies were essential to securing France's place as a global power. Others, particularly, the neo-mercantilist protectionists, they worried that overseas ventures were expensive and they were creating an unwanted competition between the colonies and the metropolitan center, because they were definitely providing cheaper raw materials, cheaper production, etc. Especially industrialists in France at this time were worried about this colonial expansion, and they resisted to it. So Yunnan, in this sense, became a focal point of larger debates about the costs and promises of empire. And the geopolitical stakes were heightened by the Sino-French War of 1884-85, which ended with French control over northern Vietnam and laid the groundwork for the creation of the Indo-Chinese Union in 1887. So by the time we came to 1890s, France was establishing its control over the region. And a decade later, the appointment of Paul Doumer as Governor General of Indochina marked a turning point. Doumer was determined to modernize and integrate Indochina, and he saw the Yunnan Railway as essential to anchoring French colonial power in the region. So this vision, again, started with the Lyon mission and explorers propagating for a railway into China. This vision finally formalized in the Sino-French Treaty of 1898. This treaty granted France the concession to build a railway from Vietnam to the capital of Yunnan province, Kunming. the treaty marked the culmination of decades-long colonial competition, economic ambition, and strategic maneuvering. It also set in motion the massive labor recruitment project that lies at the heart of my book as well. Okay, let me skip to this one. Among the most influential figure in French colonial activity in China, I would like to list these three figures. Of course, everyone will pick their own favorite figures, but for my project, these three figures were very important. Ulysse Pila was a silk merchant, and he was the one who initiated the Lyon mission because at the time France was dealing with a crisis in its silk industry, and raw silk of China was definitely a better and a cheaper option. So he initiated this mission, and he was one of the propagators, or he was very active in, among metropolitan elites to convince them that Yunnan was very important for French colonial interests. Paul Doumer, as I mentioned, became the Governor General of Indochina in 1897. And Pila was a liberal figure who was in favor of free trade and colonial expansion. Paul Doumer, he was sharing his convictions, but he was a statesman, and he was also interested in military power, political power. So he was able to combine these different perspectives. So he was the key person to convince those metropolitan elites that indeed colonial development could help French industrialists as well. So he framed colonial development in a way to formulate that this could benefit everyone in living in the French Empire. So he wanted to build Indochina as an independent and self-sufficient colony, which is not dependent on the metropolitan center, and his credibility was very key here. So another figure I list here, of course, I need to talk about maybe a little bit about what Doumer achieved in the colony. He wanted, as I said, he wanted to make the colony a self-sufficient economic unit. For this purpose, he created the monopolies of opium, alcohol, and tobacco, and salt as well. So he centralized the economy in Indochina. He created this trust for French investors and banks to provide loans to Indochina. It's arguable if those regies, monopolies were profitable, but he was able to create this environment where external actors would be willing to invest in the colony and its projects, including railway projects that he used for, again, the centralization of the colony. So in his formulation, Yunnan Railway was definitely a key, because he believed that without integrating Indo-Chinese colony to the Chinese market, it was almost impossible to develop the colony, because at this time, Vietnam was still a very agrarian agricultural country with very limited industrial production. So he believed that China market was key for the colonial development of Indochina. Of course, this does not mean that he was, his position was a little ambiguous. People had different opinions, and archival sources are also telling us different stories. Some people would say that he was in favor of a full colonization in Yunnan because he sent multiple military missions to the region, while others believe that he was this aggressive person, but he did not want to colonize Yunnan actually. So definitely the main issue here is the presence of Britain in the region. So Doumer was indeed limited by or restricted by metropolitan officials not to trigger an actual fighting between Britain and France in the region. So general consensus is that he would be in favor of a colonial operation or a military operation into Yunnan, but because of this geopolitical considerations, he had to be more restrictive. So the final figure I would like to mention here is Francis Wedge. This indeed, normally no one would include him in this picture. He was definitely not a very well-known figure. Indeed, many sources would list this figure as a loser. He was a business person born in Reunion Island. It was a French territory then. He was known as a loser because his wife was involved in an affair with his friend, French consul in Fuzhou. But I include him here. I mean, it was very difficult to find even a picture of him. So I hope this picture is accurate and well seen. This figure is interesting because he was a business person doing all sorts of, commercial activities, including mining, rice trade. But for my purposes, he's important because he was doing coolie trade. He was involved in the recruitment of workers for different colonial projects, in particular French colonial operations in South Asia. Reunion Island was definitely a place he carried workers. So again, this is the time we see, slavery was being abolished by different colonial powers. There's a very strong anti-slavery discourse globally, but plantations, colonial territories needed labor. So he found this gap and he started recruiting Chinese workers for French colonies. What he did differently, though, normally the coolie trade would operate well in China's southeastern provinces, Hong Kong, Macau. These were definitely the first places where coolie trade started. But then he also believed that people in these areas were not good enough or not disciplined enough. That's the terminology he's using. And he wanted to recruit workers from the interior parts of the country with the help of specifically Catholic missionaries. So he believed that indeed Christian converts would serve better the purposes in those plantations, because he had multiple issues in his first rounds of recruitment. So which brings us to the question of the coolie trade, the global coolie trade, which was central to the construction of the Yunnan Railway. So after the abolition of slavery, European colonial powers, again led by Britain, turned to the densely populated regions of China and India. Slavery, as I said, was becoming very problematic, but also becoming very expensive. So coolie trade was a form of contract labor. Of course, it had multiple forms. There were credit ticket systems, so workers were recruited and they later paid their travel expenses through their salaries. But the main problem with the coolie trade is that those contracts were binding. So if workers violated the contract terms, they were subject to punishments. And in many instances, they did not have any protection once they left their countries. I'm not going into details of the Indian coolie trade. That was a British operated business, but I'm going into the details of Chinese coolie trade. Again, maybe you know this, before the 19th century, foreign travel in China was strictly controlled. Of course, we know that for centuries, Chinese people, especially from Southeast provinces, were migrating to Southeast Asia. Indeed, those numbers were in millions because there were multiple political upheavals in China. After the Taiping Rebellion, for example, there was a big exodus. So we know that Southeast Asia was always receiving Chinese immigration, and labor immigration was such a central theme. But with the coolie trade, it was the colonial powers or new states looking for cheap labor instead of to replace slave labor. So in the 19th century, when the unequal treaties signed, I know we normally talk about these treaties in terms of, opening China's ports and, some compensations, etc. But a major another significance of these treaties was the forced liberalization of the Chinese labor market. So Britain and Dutch colonists were already doing this in Southeast Asia. They were trying to open up labor markets and liberate those, individuals, people from their local communities. And they did the same things in China with the unequal treaties after the Opium Wars. So it became possible for Chinese individuals to take the boats of colonial powers, travel to overseas territories, and be employed by these colonial powers. So this was, I call, the forced liberalization of the Chinese labor market. And it made the coolie trade possible. Again, there were different forms of the coolie trade. And also we should exclude the United States from this picture. In the United States at the time, there was a very strong anti-slavery discourse. So the arrival of Chinese immigrants in the United States were a little different. So countries like Peru, Spain, they had interstate agreements with Qing China, and they did official recruitment. And there were also independent recruiters like Monsieur Vetch, who also signed treaties. Here in this picture, you see the contracts for the Yunnan Indochina Railway, again prepared by Vetch company, and they were prepared in two languages, Chinese and French. Once again, for all these recruitments, they needed the approval of local authorities. And only after these contracts were signed in front of official authorities that workers were taken to their work site. Here you see the images of the construction of the Yunnan Railway. The thing is that this global coolie trade gave the French colonizers the impression that Chinese labor was abundant and available even on a global scale. So indeed, labor shortage was not something expected for the French railway company. But as you can see in these images, indeed, Yunnan was very different from the rest of China, especially Southeast China. It was indeed sparsely populated, not densely populated. They already had labor shortage. Its main economic activity was mining, so people had some experience. But again, the region they were planning to build the railway was close to the Vietnam border, and those areas were sparsely populated by indigenous communities living in mountainous areas. The topography was very difficult, and most importantly, especially the southern sections were characterized by malaria. So indeed, local people knew how difficult the region was, so they were not eager to work for this railway project. So in the early years, French engineers spent quite some time to survey the area. They had to make some changes in the original route because of the difficulties. But eventually, once they started the actual construction, they realized that the project would be very difficult, mainly because of the labor question, because there were not enough workers, and they had to recruit workers within this coolie trade system from the southeast provinces, places like Guangzhou, Guangxi, even Fuzhou, as far as Tianjin. They had to make recruitment in all these areas with the help of those recruitment agencies. And indeed, this showed again, this showed how difficult it would be for the French colonizers to make this project possible. Every year there was the work season was also very limited, conditioned by the climate, and workers were resisting in different forms. Again, they were not locals were not eager to work. The people they brought from other provinces were escaping from the work sites immediately after they realized the conditions. They were acting in groups, and they were quite rebellious, and they were all sorts of problems with the employers. Again, another thing I have to highlight here, it was mostly the Italian contractors who were doing the actual construction, because again, the French company, the Indo-Chinese administration was not able to find willing French investors for this difficult project. So it was mostly Italian contractors who were not subject to any kind of interstate agreement, and they were becoming quite abusive. So indeed, workers were responding to that. So when French and Italian, all these, especially the main company employers, when they thought about this question, those labor struggles on the railway, their response was shaped by their understanding of the labor question along those lines of yellow peril, the Chinese question, because in this time period, as a result of this coolie trade, there was a very strong anti-Chinese discourse on a global scale. Especially the United States was implementing Chinese exclusion laws. And when they did that, again, they were doing it in the name of protecting the interests of the white working classes. We have the same arguments in the United States, same arguments in South Africa, in British territories. French industrialists are making similar arguments, and they are turning this economic question into a racial question. And they are making all sorts of arguments about the cultural characteristics of Chinese people, or sometimes Asiatic races in general, calling them not disciplined, not enjoying work, etc., etc. So this is the global framework of how French employers understood labor resistance on the work sites. And labor resistance in Yunnan took different forms. As you can see, some examples I put here. Absenteeism is the most common form, as I was able to observe in archival documents. So again, many of these people coming from different provinces, they signed the contracts, they arrived in groups, but as soon as they realized the work was difficult, accommodations were not good enough, food was very limited, and healthcare was a major question. So they were leaving the work sites immediately. In some instances, the government officials, because of the agreement with the French government, they had to implement some work orders. So they were indeed asking some local villagers to come and join. And those communities, when they came again in groups, they were damaging the railway, because they at this time had very strong anti-foreign feelings, and they did not want foreigners to be involved in the province. When they were not paid, because those Italian contractors were also very undisciplined. So if they were not paid, they were stealing the property of those contractors. And in some instances, workers were even killing those contractors. Petitioning was another form. In many instances, we see them in contact with local officials, and those local officials were negotiating with French agents for better terms and for the payment of salaries and etc. But again, most importantly, the recruitment was done in Southeast provinces like, Guangdong area, for example. People were simply not signing the contracts offered by the French. I think this, to me, is a very important connection here with the coolie trade, because in those areas, coolie trade was functioning for so many years by now. By mid-19th century, there were numerous uprisings against the notorious coolie trade, because sometimes it took the form of kidnapping. Many people lost their lives abroad, or many people were not able to come back. So there was this information and knowledge about the coolie trade. So people simply did not sign the contracts offered by French railway company. And in many instances, they were comparing the terms of different contracts offered by different countries, and whatever worked better for them, they were choosing that. And France had great difficulty, even with the help of those, local recruiters, in finding workers. So labor resistance was one aspect of it, but there was also community resistance. And this is, as you know, around 1900, there was the Boxer Rebellion in the north, but anti-foreign feelings were very common all around China. And because France and England came to Yunnan to exploit the mines, so they also had some mining concessions. Around 1903, for example, there was a major miner uprising, and they made it very clear that they did not want foreigners because Yunnan mining has its own characteristics, so local community was reacting to that. Around 1906, as I said in the introduction, Yunnan Journal was started to be published by the Revolutionary Alliance. So we see around this time, nationalists are emerging as a new political actor in the province. So they are challenging not only the French projects here, but they're also challenging the Qing government authority in Yunnan. And this type of propaganda culminated in the Hukou Rebellion in 1906. This was a major uprising. Again, from the archival sources, I found that it was not entirely anti-foreign. Most importantly, it was anti-Manchu and anti-government uprising. But still, during this uprising, Chinese communities in Vietnam provided help, and some indeed they used the territory and the railway to penetrate Yunnan. So they came through the border and they started this uprising. For a month, they were in control of Mengzi, the main city, famous for its mining and also the customs office there. Eventually, the uprising was suppressed, but many workers were participating, and indeed some rebels impersonated as railway workers. So this also caused a tension between France and Qing government, and many of hundreds of workers were expelled from the region as a result of this uprising, and the tensions between China and France continued after this. So, to conclude, Yunnan Railway was not only a major French business venture in China, but also a formative choice in shaping the colonial economy of Indochina, especially with Doumer's policies to centralize the Indo-Chinese economy and connect it to Chinese markets, made Yunnan Railway a key channel to create that connection. So in that sense, it was not only a business venture, but it was also a catalyst for the colonial policy of France in the region. To me, the construction of the railway was marked by severe labor shortages, and that was the main issue because of the climate, because of all the labor conflicts at the work site, and then later some nationalist uprisings. They also contributed to this tension, turned the labor question into a political one. And unfortunately, around 12,000 Chinese and Vietnamese workers, mostly Chinese, because I'm studying the Chinese section of the railway, not the Vietnamese section. So around 12,000 workers lost their lives. But all these struggles during the construction made it one of the earliest examples of Chinese labor resistance to colonialism, because typical labor histories will start from May 4th movement, 1919, and will not consider the earlier movements so significant. But to me, all these, daily encounters were examples of a nascent labor movement in China. When I look at the global significance of the railway, I see again the emergence of a working class here. Not in the sense that, working class consciousness, those are not the arguments that I would like to make. But here I see a group of individuals who are aware of their interests and who are aware of the global reality, who are aware of the changing dynamics of Chinese labor market and the global labor market, and fight for their interests within this new context. So in that sense, the emergence of the Chinese working class must be understood within this broader framework of racial capitalism. And this capitalist conflicts were very much informed by the racial tropes of the time. The term is coming, racial capitalism is coming from Cedric Robinson, but capitalism from the very beginning was a very racial phenomenon, and Yunnan Railway gives us the same, a similar impression. Here, I would like to thank you for listening to my presentation. You see the final picture. This is the celebration for the completion of the railway in 1910. They organized a special event to celebrate the completion of the railway, and they talked about how they lost so many people, and it turned out to be a very costly endeavor for France. Thank you.